All right, I got the go ahead. I hope everybody else did.
Yep.
So
Yep,
we're
you're
not
good to
hearing
go.
All right, well.
Yay.
All right, well, good afternoon and welcome to the November 21st, 2022 meeting of the East Bay Regional Park District Board Finance Committee meeting. We've got an excellent, exciting meeting today. And I think we'll start off probably by taking roll. And Shannon, would you do that? And we also let people know we welcome everyone to come through the hybrid type meeting here. We're all meeting via Zoom, but if you'd like to participate, you're more than welcome to, and Shannon will tell you how to do that.
Sure, happy to do that. So as Director Wasby said, today's meeting is held pursuant to the Brown Act amended by AB 361. And we are providing live audio and video streaming. We encourage members of the public to participate. And if you would like to make a public comment, you can do so either live via the Zoom meeting or by submitting an email to me at srice@ebparks.org or by leaving a voicemail at 510-544-2400. And all of this information is noted on our agenda on our website, which is ebparks.org. And if there are no questions about the meeting procedures, we can take roll.
All right.
Okay. Director and Chair Wasby.
Here.
Director Wieskamp.
Here.
Director Eccles.
Here.
Great, thank you. And would AGM Deborah Ocker like to introduce the staff participating?
Great. Thank you, Shannon. I'm Deborah Ocker, the AGM of Finance and Management Services. We have several other AGMs with us, and we have our Deputy General Manager, Jim O'Connor. We have Police Chief, AGM of Public Safety, Anthony Chiburo. We have AGM of HR, Allison Cook. We have Acting AGM of Acquisition, Stewardship, and Development, Lisa Gorgian. And we have Acting AGM of Operations, Steve Castile. Our General Manager was unavailable today, but I think we have a great team. We also have many members of the district and the finance department. And I'll just quickly introduce our budget team because the budget is our first item. We have Deborah Spalding, our assistant finance officer, Christina Crosby, our budget manager, and Tao Von Sepon is our project administrative assistant. Thank you.
All right, so to begin, our first item is the East Bay Regional Park District's 2023 proposed budget.
Okay, thank you, Director Wasby. I'll go ahead and share my screen, and we will start this presentation. I know we have several items today. Let's see if I can. Is that displayed correctly, Deb? Yes?
We're actually seeing your notes screen right now.
Oh, so I switched it
This is good.
incorrectly.
It looks good.
Right.
Does it look correct, or is it my
No.
notes screen? It's
Now it
correct
looks
now?
good.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So this is our first budget presentation to the Board Finance Committee. As many of you know, we will be presenting this several times during the year. Our budget process starts with, throughout the year, from time to time, we do many community surveys to gather input. We do board study sessions. This year, we had several board study sessions, including a review of divisions. Each division went through and presented their priorities. We also had a new type of study session discussing capital project prioritizations and bringing forward a policy to the board to adopt later on. And then we covered board interests, where each board member got to share their priorities and what their interests are. And that was summarized and presented, I believe, later in the year in September. And we had a land session and some other study sessions. So we gather all of that information, and then starting in July and August, the divisions all get together and look at what their budget needs are. And then we start to develop the proposed budget in September and November. And we go through several presentations, this being one of them. On Thursday, we presented the budget in its proposed draft form to the staff. And then we will be presenting to the Park Advisory Committee next Monday on the November 28th. And then we bring the introduction to the budget to the full board of directors in December. And we also adopt the budget at the second meeting in December. So that's the full budget process. As we start working on our budget, we focus on the mission of the district. That's always the center point. And then, as I mentioned, we do take into consideration input from the board of directors. And as I mentioned, we had several study sessions this year. We had the board discuss their interest in late July with the staff. And then we brought back their top interests and kind of our status report in September. And out of that report, we had several big categories that we were highlighting that you'll see throughout this budget: workforce development and support, fire mitigation and prevention, land conservation, expanding public access to nature, and climate smart stewardship and restoration. You can see those themes through all the board interest and throughout the budget. So as we dig into our budget, I just want to point out that the district has always been supported with strong fiscal policies adopted by this board of directors. It includes a balanced budget policy and fund balance reserve policies. These policies are used to develop the annual budget process, and they help the district to stay in a strong financial position even during times of recession that we can see is kind of on the future horizon and does end up being cyclical. So we're always looking at that. We also look at these budget balancing principles when we're focusing on this budget. As I mentioned, the mission, financial sustainability, protection of our greatest resources, which are our employees, are some of the budget balancing principles that we use when we put the budget together. In addition, we look to address any legal or regulatory mandates. There's always other people telling us what we need to take care of. That becomes a big part of our budget. Also, looking at our long-term maintenance of our capital assets is a big part of our principles. So we do, when we put the budget together, we understand these are taxpayer dollars. We strive to align our values of the district with our spending. And we take, at a minimum, we look at our experience and we do project long-term for these types of cyclical recessions and economic downturns that can come up from time to time. This year it's in the news a lot. These downturns come up every 10 years or so, and our financial projections are building that in. However, this year, our growth is based on the assessed valuation of the two counties, Contra Costa County and Alameda County, and the assessed valuations for the 2023 year have held strong. We will see reductions in those assessed valuations in the future, and as I mentioned, those are built into our budget. This year, our property tax revenue growth is just over 7%. So you'll see that as you look through these numbers. We're not ignoring that there is economic uncertainty on the horizon, but for this year, our data shows that we're in a growth mode for 2023. So as we put the budget together, we start off with our current level of service, our base budget, and then we evaluate our revenue stream, as I mentioned, and then we go ahead and see where are the areas that we see that we need to grow and put our focus on. So here are some of the highlights of the budget as we're looking forward. Public access is always important. So anytime we're opening new parks or new amenities in our parks, we're making sure that we staff those parks. We're looking at, increasing access to the Ridge Trail this year, hopefully opening up the Coyote Hills Patterson property, continuing to work on the McCosker Creek property. Also environmental restoration, continuing the cleanup at Anthony Chabot, and natural and open space infrastructure, setting money aside for that. And then public safety, park safety, and hazardous fuels reduction is a huge part of our focus. We continue to put money aside. There's $1.3 million for our fuels management program from our general funds in this year's budget. Also, we're looking at our air support unit, making improvements to that for fuels management and fighting of wildfires, adding a new fire lieutenant in that area. So let's look at my notes and see. As we're putting together our budget, we are looking at where are we growing. And we've seen over the last several years, as you're all aware, that we're growing the growth in our park visitors, the acreage of land that we manage and support. And this year, we're also focusing on some administrative infrastructure. As the park district grows and the parks grow, we also have to look at how we do our business. So this budget is focusing a little bit on that. And so you can see some of these highlights in park operations. We're looking at efficiency improvements. So we're kind of reorganizing park operations to have the work be focused on a more geographic area type focus. And then we're adding a whole park unit to add capacity there with an additional unit manager. On the infrastructure maintenance side, our maintenance and skilled trades team, known as MAST, are adding a new unit for major maintenance, which includes a superintendent. And so that's going to focus on getting some of these big maintenance projects and keeping our assets in good shape. We've also added additional funding for the design and construction unit to keep projects moving forward. And then just related to general workforce development and support, we're adding an Office of Equity in the General Manager's office. We also are adding staffing to our IS department and our Human Resources department. All right, so I'll give a few more details about the district's work plan for 2023, which includes new appropriations and including these multi-year projects that we are always working on and initiatives. I'll talk about the numbers a little bit later, but here we're going to go ahead and talk about our work plans and how they tie to the master plan and the board interests, and we'll use performance goals to go through that. So here, one of our performance goals is plan for climate change resiliency. As we mentioned, we are working on this tree die-off that we've learned about over the last few years, and really focusing this year on the Anthony Chabot area, where we have set money aside to start a big treatment, and also will be receiving $10 million from the state that will be able to be used district-wide. Continuing our drought recovery type work by looking at our irrigation systems for 8 parks, and continuing partnerships with green transportation and looking at regional trails. Improving access to parklands and outreach to underrepresented groups. So at the Martin Luther King Jr. shoreline, we have a big project underway, the Tidewater Day Use Project. Phase 1 of that is going to be completed within next year. This budget includes an additional $575,000 in their budget. The project total is about $12 million. So when we come back for phase 2, we'll be bringing additional funding forward. We also have at MLK the San Francisco Bay Trail improvements at Doolittle Drive. Those will be completed next year. That project total is $11 million, and we're continuing work on that. A few other things, park development, expanding adventure crew out at Thorogood Marshall Regional Park, home of the Port Chicago 50, working on recreational opportunities out there. Our next item is fostering a safe visitor experience. Here we're putting forward some technical improvements in public safety, in improving our communications. And then also our lifeguard program is very important, continuing our water safety programs at all of our swim areas. Enhancing a visitor's relationship to nature. Continuing with park signage, specifically out at Coyote Hills, putting new trail posts out there with Native American names. And then planning to remodel the Ardenwood Visitor Center, starting work on that and starting to design Thorogood Marshall Regional Park as well, the visitor center area. And then balancing environmental considerations with our outdoor recreation opportunities. So here we're looking at putting a shade structure near the back end of the Del Val Visitor Center where there's some outdoor kiosk panels. Also creating signage for downhill mountain biking. And then continuing our visitor use facilities like water bottle filling stations, hand washing stations, and accessible restrooms and play structures. In the area of restoring and preserving our natural and cultural resources, we have been very involved in educating ourselves and being knowledgeable about the state's funding for the 30 by 30 program, as well as the federal program, America the Beautiful. Those are all goals that match up with our mission. And so we're tracking that and also looking to see if there's funding available in those areas for us to continue our mission. The headwaters of San Leandro Creek is our McCosker Creek Restoration Project, which is coming up and finishing up our phase 1 of that. We continue work there. And then also our sanitation team continues to innovate and bring forward new efficiencies with this new project that they're working on really waste reduction, working on our waste reduction goals and getting to a zero waste action plan. And our last, second to the last. So here, ensuring the fiscal health of the park district. This year we've embarked on a 5-year strategic plan for our information services department. It's a district-wide plan, and we hope to bring those recommendations forward to the board next year. Also, really focusing on reducing our workers' compensation claims and continuing our very successful grant program with, at a minimum, applying for San Francisco Bay Restoration Authority grants and Prop 68 state park bond grants, and many more, I hope. Attracting and retaining a workforce of excellence. This is our last of our highlighted performance goals. And as I mentioned, establishing an Office of Equity to build the necessary infrastructure for meaningful cultural organizational change, increasing workforce diversity, and building a sense of belonging. Continuing to work on the repair. This photo is an early photo of the Vasco Hills service yard where we had a fire. We're working on finishing up that project. And then also the budget includes optimizing staff spaces here at Peralta Oaks, at other work sites, and working towards our Peralta Oaks North building as well. Okay, so the numbers, if you guys are ready for that, I'm just going to keep powering through. You can definitely interrupt me if you have questions, but we can save those to the end too, where Deb and Christina can help me answer them. So let's see, this budget is $387.6 million district-wide, including all appropriations and transfers. That is actually our largest budget. It's increased by 97 million from the prior year, and there's a few reasons why. One of the reasons are we're changing a little bit about the way we do our budget. We used to do the annual adopted budget, which was very based on operations, and then throughout the year and specifically at mid-year, we would bring forward a lot of new appropriations focused on projects and long-term needs. So here, this year, we are incorporating all of those kind of mid-year and throughout the year appropriations and trying to bring them together into this annual budget process. It's a much better practice. And so therefore, we have a lot of project appropriations included in this year's budget, which maybe we hadn't included in prior years. Also, I mentioned that we are addressing some administrative infrastructure this year. And then also our debt service, we just issued bonds in February of this year. And so when we have newly issued bonds, our payments for interest and principal, we call that debt service, those costs go up a little bit in the first few years. And so there's an increase in that area. So those are some of the big reasons why our budget has grown. Also, we're a growing park district. So first we look at the revenue side, right? Our total resources, $277 million. The majority of that is taxes and assessments. As I said, these are taxpayer dollars. We also have fees and charges for our park usage. Contracts and leases, philanthropic and other miscellaneous costs. So to go into the details of those, you can see here our largest portion, over $226 million, is made up of these types of taxes and assessments. So property tax is $185 million. Of these of this revenue. It's a 7.6% increase from the prior year. That's about kind of similar to last year as well. Our GEO bond, those are our general obligation bonds, as I mentioned. We do have a special tax levy for that, and that's up over 200% because of what I told you. We issued new bonds, so that's about $32.7 million of our revenue, and that goes to pay those debt services. And then we also have our initiatives, Measure FF, Lighting and Landscaping District, some other special revenue, CFDs, those are about $8.5 million, and that's about the same as last year. On the park fees and charges for services area, park fees have grown because of camping fees being increased, mainly focusing on the Dunbarton Quarry campground being open for a full year. So that increases our revenue about $450,000. And then concessionaire fees have already kind of bounced back from the pandemic, and they're about the same as in the prior year. And internal service charges, we've done a little bit of a change in the way we do accounting. And so our fleet fund is going to be now represented as a internal service serving the whole district. And so we just changed the way we do that. So there's an increase in these, what we call internal service charges, that will fund the fleet operations, just doing things a little differently. On the property usage area, the majority of that is our grazing revenue, about $825,000. The other usage fees are some residential rentals and communication sites. And the last column there, we've been drawing down on our pension trust. We're continuing to contribute to a pension trust, but also the purpose of it was to smooth out any rate volatility. So we've drawn on that during this current year, and we've budgeted for that next year. So that shows up as an other revenue source. We have about $1.1 million in our base budget from the foundation, and they put forward other contributions throughout the year. And so that's the majority of our revenue. Another thing we did differently this year is we said, interest revenue is quite volatile. It's very hard to know exactly what's going to happen because sometimes at the end of the year, the market has just changed and we have to adjust our revenue stream for that. So we took out our budget for interest income, our interest earnings. So this current year, it was 2.6 million. This budget year, it has 0, and we'll just see how it comes in. So that's really the picture of our revenue. As I mentioned, the majority of our funding district-wide comes from assessments and taxes. Now remember, this budgeted revenue does not include our grant program. Our grants are budgeted separately as they are approved by the granting agencies. So that is still an area that will come in throughout the year. And that is in addition to what you see here. All right, on the spending side. So for our appropriations, we are up 29% district-wide over the prior year. That goes to our operating budgets, our general fund, projects, as I mentioned, those have increased. Our internal service expenditures have increased, as I mentioned, due mainly to the fleet and also our insurance premiums going up year after year. And then in special revenue, there's a small decrease, mainly because one of our special revenue funds is our local grant program from Measure from Measure WW. And we had always budgeted to, provide those grant funds to other agencies, and we're just winding down on that program. There's not many grant funds left. We're just 98% spent, I think. So that number came down because of that. And then debt service grew because of those new bonds that now I've talked about a couple of times. So our overall appropriations, the majority of those are our service delivery, our personnel costs, and you can see the other half is broken down into the rest of those categories. So one of the biggest things we always want to talk about every year are staffing. So as we grow, we see that we have the need for additional staff. Like I said, the park visitation is growing, the managed acres of land is growing, our administrative needs are growing. This year's budget includes 40.35 additional full-time equivalent positions. And so I'll go over where those come from in a minute. In your budget document, I failed to mention that the proposed budget is posted on our website, and there's a link from the Finance Committee report to this. It's also, if you just type into the search budget, it's listed in there. And on pages B49 through 52, that lists out the details of these additional positions that are part of our proposed budget. And so as we've committed to in the past, whenever we're opening up new parks or new park amenities, we want to make sure that we're staffing those areas before we open them to the public with operations staff, stewardship staff, and public safety. And so the budget includes 9.35 of these what we call pipeline positions. And then also the operations division has acknowledged that we no longer are a 7-month out of the year park district. We used to have people go on furlough over the winter, but we're busy all year round. So we're still continuing to update every year some of these 9-month positions to become full 12-month positions. So there's 9 of those upgrades in here. Sometimes we do it through attrition or wherever it makes sense with in a park unit. So a little bit more about the details of what we have in these 40 positions. As I mentioned, the operations division has a couple of reorganizations, including the mast maintenance unit. Also park operations has their new unit manager and reorganizing the way they're done, and many new field operations staff are included in their additions. We also, district-wide, we did a couple of things. We kind of reorganized some of the administrative staff that may have been focused on the general managers, in the general manager's budget, and put them to the right divisions where they are. So we moved the, legal assistant to the legal division and a public affairs executive assistant to that division. Also, we reorganized how the interns are spread. They used to all be part of HR. Now they're spread throughout the district in the different divisions. So on the public safety side, we have 1 new police sergeant. We have 1.2 police officer positions, and then we have 1 fire lieutenant added as part of their budget requests. In acquisition, stewardship, and development, there's a position specifically to work on conservation lands that'll be in the planning department, and then a couple of positions focused on wildland, vegetation, and IPM. In the finance and management services division, we have 2 positions focused for IS and 1 in the finance department, an accountant. In the general manager's office, we mentioned we added 2 positions for the Office of Equity. And in human resources, there are 3 new positions added, one for employee labor relations, one for benefits, and one for general. So those are the majority of all the big changes. As I mentioned, you could see those on the details. And this is kind of the makeup by representation of these 40 positions being added. So you can see we continue to grow. We did hold on the year that we were in the middle of the pandemic with so much uncertainty. And so now we're kind of catching up. We see that we need to continue to provide this high level of service to our park users. And so we have here that we're responding to what is, I think the general manager mentioned that she's been out in the parks and asking, what is it that we need to do our jobs? And she continuously hears that we need more staff coverage. So we're responding to that. Okay, so that finishes our operating budget side. Now I'm going to just briefly highlight a few things in our project and program budget. Remember, this is a volume 2 of our proposed budget, lists out all the projects that are in process and the new appropriations that are going towards that. I think there's a page in here that lists out all of these projects. If you wanted a cheat sheet, I'll have to come back to that and tell you what it is, or maybe Christina can do that when I'm done. It just summarizes everything. But in general, we have, as we talked about, we have our capital projects, which are the larger capital improvements, budgets with over $100,000. We give them a full page in the budget just to show what the status is, what the 5-year expenditure plan is on that, things like that. And then we have other things that are either ongoing or programmatic in nature, and we've put those into a program list where things are kind of grouped by like kinds. And also I had briefly mentioned our capital project prioritization policy that the board of directors adopted. So that was really significant because we have so many projects out there. Sometimes it's hard to figure out what is the most important to work on. And so this is a new way of ranking our capital projects, and it's really focusing on a few areas where they get points. Equity, if it's increasing and enhancing public access, climate preparedness, partnerships, which also is very important and includes kind of grant funding that's available. If it's contributing to operating efficiencies, public and environmental health, or it has multi-beneficial things that we're looking at where we can improve many things, a road and a sewer system at the same time, extends the useful life of our assets, and that the project is ready. So those are kind of the criteria that helps us rank these things. We also identified that from time to time, and in this budget, you'll see many things that are marked E or essential. And those are things that we either are mandated to do, staff has decided, there's a regulatory, a safety, or a legal requirement. Some of these projects are already in process, and we need to just kind of move those forward to the front of the line in some cases. So you can see here in our, this is an example of one page of the budget. Down here, you can see where it says CPP score. The total is 135 is the highest score. The budget book explains all of that, but you can see one of our projects here, which is already complete, Restore Encinal Beach, received a 105 score. And that will really help us in the future. This budget, our work plan, was kind of already in process by the time we adopted this policy late in the year, but it will continue to inform our prioritization as we go forward. So here in this budget, we have, our total project budget is almost $400 million or something like that. I don't have the exact number, but, since we have all these multi-year projects going forward, I believe it's about $48 million of new appropriations, but that's adding to projects that are already in process. And here's kind of the dollar breakdown of where these things are going. A lot contributed to public access and infrastructure. infrastructure. Also, land acquisition has a large appropriation, and restoration. And then we have our equipment and technology that we're always focusing on to help us do business. So included in this budget, here's just a few highlights. As I mentioned, we did not do our mid-year kind of typical process where we appropriate to some of our long-term needs areas. And so you can see some of these are included in here. And so habitat preservation, infrastructure, land use, technology and workspace improvements. I'll just mention that because it has 13.5 million in there. 13 million of that is setting money aside for future office needs, which can be for district-wide needs, including Peralta Oaks North. And then we also have other project appropriations, including, like I mentioned, Ardenwood, the Bay Area Ridge Trail, additional funding for Black Diamond Mines. I have some slides on some of these, so I'm just going to skip forward to those and show you some pictures. I'm almost done, so we'll be ready for questions. Here we have a photo of inside the mine. And as this mine ages, we have to look at the timber and, replace some of it. I think a lot of it, actually. This budget is adding $300,000 to work towards the design on this. The estimated project cost is $4 million, so this one's just getting started, but we know that's important. We mentioned our Coyote Hills project. This is a restoration project, but this is them putting in the road. So it's a really fantastic restoration of the largest donation of land that the district has received from the Patterson family. And we're putting in $360,000 mainly to demo one of the properties that are on there. This project is an $18 million project. It's in construction and it's fully funded. The Hayward Marsh. So this is something that we'll be working on endlessly. There's lots of work to do out there. We have a budget of 1.3 million. In this proposed budget, we're adding 745 million. Remember, as part of this budget, we're trying to say, how much money do we need during 2023 to do whatever work we're doing, whether it be pre-design, design and permit, or construction. And we tried to include that. So it's not a complete, project budget, but it's what do we need in 2023 to get our work done so we don't have to continuously come back to the board. So this project, of course, we don't even know the total project cost of the work at the marsh that's necessary. It's in pre-design right now. And then out at Oyster Bay, we continue to do recreational improvements out there. We're adding the remainder of the WW funding that's available for this park. That's $1.4 million. And that's going to help fund kind of some of that final work and that final entrance, that public access off of Neptune Drive that we've decided to have the park visitors come in through. And so that'll be a total of a $3 million budget to get that project done, going in phase 2. So that concludes my my presentation. As we mentioned, we're here at the Finance Committee. We go to the Park Advisory Committee next Monday, and then 2 meetings with the Board of Directors, with the introduction of the budget being at a 6 p.m. meeting. So with that, today we are asking you for a recommendation once we get through all of our questions and comments to recommend to the full Board of Directors adoption of this budget. So with that, I will stop sharing, I think, if I can figure out how to do that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Deborah, for that great presentation, and a little overwhelming, but wonderful. Who wants to start? Board members, comments, questions? Director Eccles.
I can go. Well, thank you, Deborah, very much for the overview, and really appreciate all the work that your team and all of the staff around the district did in pulling this all together. It's very well done. for the most part, I think I understand what you've got in these documents. I did have, well, I did want to acknowledge, first of all, that I'm very happy to see the 2 dedicated staff for the equity office. I think that's really important to drive those initiatives forward. So that was great. And then I did have one, minor question about the work at Tilden Park, in particular, the one that has to do with replacing the playground design and build cover structures for the Little Farm. So I don't know if someone can just say a little bit more about what's going to be going on there.
Let's see, I am not that familiar with that specific project, but maybe if AGM Steve Castile knows if that's an operations project, give us a minute and we'll get back to you on that one.
Of course.
Unless, Steve, are you ready to answer? Do you need a minute to look that one up? Okay. We'll see
So
if we can-
which project was that?
This was you've got 2 Tilden projects. It's the one that's on page 92, Tilden Regional Park. It's replacing some structures in the Little Farm area.
Mhm.
If
Yeah.
you read your book, it's page E92, if that helps you. I have a little bit of recollection on this project, which I don't know exactly what your question is, Director Eccles, but originally the district received a grant to do some work there. And then I believe the project was expanded to include replacing the structures to protect the sheep and the goats.
And then are they going to be replacing, it says they're replacing the playground. I was just interested to know what was, well, okay.
I believe that
You guys can get back to me.
Yeah, we'll get back to you.
Yeah, I don't think I was aware of this, but yeah, I think I might have heard something about the structures for the sheep and the goats, but I'm not sure I knew about the replacing the playground, and I'm not sure what that means. So I just was interested to know.
I believe the playground work was already completed. And that is the playground that's near Little Farm. And so the funding is, it looks like DGM O'Connor recalls this.
Good afternoon. Director Eccles, I believe that project actually might be completed for that structure for the sheep and goats, but let's check on, we might even be able to get back to you before the end of this meeting.
Yeah, and this could be, I know you did some work on the playground to make it safer so kids couldn't just like run out onto the road really easily, and which was critical. So I know that work's been done. So maybe some of that, maybe this has to do with that as well, but I believe that's been completed. So that's why it caught my eye. I just wasn't sure what it was. But
Yeah,
thank you. And sorry for not getting the question to you in advance. It's been a quick turnaround on this.
Yeah, no problem. We'll get back to you. I believe this most of this work might be done, but we'll get back to you maybe even before the end of the meeting.
Great, thank you.
Anyone else?
It's always amazing to me how many things, but I've got to admit, I enjoy going through looking at all the projects that are coming online that we've been waiting for years in some cases. And again, I'm interested too in what's going on out there at Tilden, even if it isn't in my area. But you do such a great job of pulling all of it together for us. But there's a lot of data, I've got to be honest. There is. It's a good thing that we have a great finance department. That's all I can say.
Thank you, Director Wieskamp. The budget team does amazing work at pulling us all together. And I feel like the budget document really is quite complete, and it provides a lot of the details that the public and you would be interested in. The full list of projects, like I was mentioning, is in volume 1,
Right.
listed on pages B104 through B106, and it lists them kind of by funding source. So you can see there might be one project listed in 2 areas because maybe it got some measure FF and some measure WW, but Those are all summarized there.
All right. Well, I would like to again thank the budget team. It's an amazing deal. I think I've done this 8 times now, and it's I'm always amazed. I don't know how you guys pull rabbits out of hats like you do. I still have a little, well, anyway, it's a little different this year, which is I'm sure will be fine. But just from looking at all and doing this all the time, and I'm going to have to look more because, gosh, we're going to have a couple more meetings dealing with this, and I'm glad we are. But I'm incredibly happy about internships coming back, apprenticeship programs coming back. I think, you talk about things, old John Sutter used to always talk about wanting something to happen and having 30 years later, you always see it happen. And it hasn't been that long, but boy, geographically based park units make so much sense and has for so long. I'm glad we're finally doing that. I'm very happy we're going into continue our efforts in fire mitigation. And boy, it seems like this is really heavy, and you're listening about opening new parks, doing more projects, opening more trails, making access a key part of our mission and our delivery service. So I'm really happy about that. And gosh, I won't ask the question, Deborah. I love your confidence. And we haven't really had a recession, whatever you want to call it, since I've been around. But is it usually, or this is a philosophical question, I guess, or maybe it's not. I mean, so yeah, I know next year our property taxes are, going up 7%, but I'm also told that when you jump out of a plane, it's down before you land. Has there been any past history of how we recover if there's a recession? Do we lag 1 year behind in having to tighten our belts a little bit, or do we just kind of smooth, like Dave used to say?
Those are great questions, Director Waspy. Thank you for bringing that up. As we look forward, remember we do use an outside firm for our property tax projections, and Deb Spalding can maybe recall what it is for the next few years out when I'm done. But we do look forward, and as we put this budget together, adding new positions is a long-term commitment, right? This is growth in our base budget. We have no intention of laying anyone off. The Park District does not, ever plan for growing too fast and then having to lay people off. During the last recession, I think we eliminated some vacant positions, but there were no layoffs. And just going back to my introduction, the fiscal policies and just the way the board of directors has directed us to run this district, we have reserves, and we do try to look forward as we grow. A lot of the funding in our budget is one-time in nature, so that we can shift if there is an economic downturn. Deb, do you recall? I know the trajectory. So when we have our property tax revenue, it's based on numbers that have come in prior, right? The county assessor has already assessed all the properties for the first 6 months of the year. So that revenue we know is coming in. The second half from July through December is based on our projections. And we do feel pretty solid about that 6 months of the year. There has not been talk about decreasing assessed valuation. So as what we're looking at is slower growth, right? So as homes and properties sell, they might not be growing in value like they have been over the last couple of years. That's been quite incredible. But new properties coming online, new development adds to the assessed valuation role. So sometimes it balances it out. It's just a projection that we try to look at, but we try to make sure we don't grow too fast. Deb, did you want to add to that?
Sure. I just pulled open the forecast that we got from Beacon Economics, which they completed in September of this year. And so their baseline projection, which is what we use when we're doing our budget for the following year, their baseline projection was that growth would be 5% in that fiscal year 2023-24. So the second half. That was their baseline. And I just looked at their low projection is 1.5%. So, but we used the baseline projection for this, and they gave in the body of their report explaining that they did not believe that if there were a recession that it would impact housing values as significantly, that it's not going to be like a repeat of the 2008 recession, that this will be much milder.
Great. Well, thank you. And I'm glad we have Beacon to rely on, put our faith in. Are there any members of the public that would want to talk? Mr. O'Connor.
Director Wasby, we have Mike Moran here. I think he could probably answer Director Eccles' question regarding the project at Tilden. So, Mike, if you're ready, maybe you can answer the question.
Great.
Thanks very much, Jim. Director Eccles, you had a question regarding the projects over at the Environmental Education Center in Little Farm. How can I help?
Yeah, specifically the one that is mentioned on wait, that's not the right one. E92, which is the structures, for the little farm, and it also says replace playground. And I know that's the little playground that's on the road on your right as you go towards the nature area. But I was just wondering, if I could get a little more detail on those.
Sure. So the projects have been completed on 2, except the goat barn is one we're waiting on. And that has gone through demolition. And we do have a design for it. It's going to need to be graded and a new foundation put in and then built from there. So we have money remaining in that project fund that we're confident will cover that construction. And it will be modeled somewhat after the sheep shearing shed that is at the top of the little farm, if you're familiar with that.
Yes. Yeah, I am. I see. Okay. So it looks like most of this money is actually already, it was in the budget as of. Okay, so they're getting no new appropriation for 2023. So this is just basically saying how that the money that was already appropriated will be sort of put into the expenditure plan 2023 and 2024. Is that okay?
That is correct. Yes.
Okay, well, that explains why some of the work's already done.
Oh, yeah, very good. Yeah, it's been very, very popular work, and we're looking forward to completing the goat barn as soon as possible. We want to get goats back in there ASAP.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Mike. Thanks for jumping on. And great job talking about the native cultural information that you shared on the news over the weekend.
Oh, great. Thanks so much. Really appreciate that.
Yeah, Mike, thanks. I was going to thank you also for, and congratulations on launching your career in television.
Thank you very much.
You bet. So are there any members of the public that would like to speak on this item, our proposed budget?
We have a hand up from Kelly Abreu.
All right, Kelly, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So we just heard about how this district didn't lose any jobs during the pandemic. I've got the graph of job growth over the last 5 years right in front of me. In the private sector, about 12 or 15% of the jobs were lost in early 2020. This district lost 0%. And during the recovery, jobs have grown about 4% a year over the last 3 years in the private sector. And this district is looking to grow jobs about 4% this year. So, you can see a little disparity where the public sector is doing a lot better than the private sector, which is paying their salaries. I don't recall any major new bond measures on the ballot in the Tri-Valley in the last year or two. Tri-Valley means Livermore and Pleasanton. How is it that this district, I still don't understand, how is it that this district tripled the bond taxes in the Tri-Valley a year or so, recently? Or conversely, how is it that a couple of years ago, this district was collecting only 1/3 of the bond taxes as compared to today? I don't understand. And then, when we talk about visitor growth and growing visitor counts, we need slides that show how visitor counts are growing, through the district, or at least at the top 5 or 10 largest parks, the actual infrared data counts. And then we keep talking about improving access at Coyote Hills by building a new staging area that isn't slated to come online for another 9 months. And at the same time, in the 1 week from today, just a week from today, we're going to eliminate all parking inside and outside the park between the hours of 5 a.m. and 8 a.m. and also during the hours of 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. That's not improving access. That's killing public access for people who drive and park on the street outside the park. And then just when we talk about that board workshop was producing informal inputs and guidance that was not approved by the full board. And it even added some phantom or parasitic capital projects, which we're still trying to figure out where those came from. So we need to be very careful when we talk about board workshop to differentiate those wish list things from actual, real, board-approved projects that are funded and on the officially approved EIR list. Things like that, the parking lot at Mission Peak. I don't want to say that again, but I'll keep saying it until I get some kind of rational response. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Deborah, go ahead.
Thank you, Director Waspy. I just wanted to be responsive a little bit about the bond rate that the district has. So the voters approved Measure WW, which allows for the district to submit a tax levy to the 2 counties on an annual basis for the purpose of the program, the capital program. And so we here at the district submit the required taxes based on pretty much exactly what the debt service requirements are. So some places might have a set flat amount that they charge throughout time, but we really are setting the levy based on the expenditures of principal and interest that are the requirements. And so it has fluctuated depending on which bonds are still outstanding. The speaker was talking about how did our debt service go so low? Well, for a while we paid off our old AA bonds that still had outstanding debt service, and we were still on a program of adding $80 to $60 million every 4 to 5 years, depending on our needs. And so this year, as I mentioned in February, we just issued the newest bond issue of $60 million. And the way our debt schedule is that the first few payments of principal were larger. That actually saves the taxpayers money in the long run. And so that's why our debt service increased from that low amount. We did make a commitment to the voters to not exceed $10 per $100,000 of assessed valuation. And we have stayed below that over this last 10-year period. So we're within that range, but that's the reason why our taxes do fluctuate, maybe as compared to other ones that have just a set debt service over a long period of time.
Thank you, Deborah. Any other public comments? Hearing none. Any other comments from staff, board, anyone? If not, we have the opportunity to recommend to the full board this proposed budget for hearing on the 6th and the 20th at our 6th and 20th board meetings.
So moved.
I see Director Eccles with a motion.
Second.
And Director Wieskamp with a second. Thank you very much. Okay, we have a motion, a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, please take a roll call, Shannon.
Thank you. Shannon Rice, Recording Secretary, taking roll call vote. Director Eccles,
Aye.
Director Wieskamp,
Aye.
and Director and Chair Wasby.
Aye.
Thank you.
The motion passes unanimously. And thank you for that presentation, everyone on the staff.
Thank you.
Our next item is the 2023 Article 13-B California appropriation limit, or as it's unpopularly known or popularly one of the two, the Gann limit.
Okay, good afternoon, Christina Crosby, Budget Manager. I'm going to go ahead and present agenda item number 2, the 2023 Gann appropriation limit. Let me share my screen. Can you guys see that?
Yes, perfect.
Yeah, we're good. Okay. Okay. So annually, as required by the California Constitution, public agencies must recognize and adopt appropriation limits as established by Article 13B, otherwise known as the Gann limit. The appropriation limit was originated in 1978-79 and is adjusted annually based on the population change factor in each county, as well as a cost of living factor, which is received via a letter from the California Department of Finance annually. In 2022, the Gann appropriation limit for the Park District was $474,334,925. Considering the 2023 adjustments for cost of living and population in both Alameda and Contra Costa counties, the appropriation limit is now calculated at $509,800,330 for the 2023 proposed budget. With the total appropriation subject to the limit at $184,387,430, the district is well under the Gann limit by over $300 million. The action requested of you today is that the Board Finance Committee recommends staff include this information in the adoption of the 2023 proposed budget, which will be submitted to the Board of Directors for approval in December. And that concludes my brief presentation of the Gann appropriation limit today.
All right. Thank you very much, Christina. Any questions or comments from board members? And Christina, would you do me a favor and
Drop the slide.
get us
Yeah,
back? Yes, please.
there we
Thank
go.
you. Director Wieskamp.
Who would like to tell me the value of the Gann limit? I've never
Well,
been able to truly understand the value.
yeah.
Is there a
For-
value?
I think there can be a value in that they want to make sure that we are not appropriating and spending more than the levels associated with the 78, 79. In most circumstances, like the district, we don't come close to it at all. We're so well under it that it is not a factor for us, really, and just a legal requirement that we must do. Deborah,
Okay,
did you want to add to that?
nobody else understands it better either. Okay, it's always just struck me as one of those oddities that we go through yearly.
It may have been more important when boards could set tax rates themselves.
Oh,
Remember, now there's been so many laws where the voters have to approve new taxes,
okay.
and Prop 13. So I think in the past, when different agencies were setting their own tax rate, there was a concern that things were growing too fast. And so this was a way of
Okay.
seeing where you are. It's not as important now because we have so many laws and voter approvals and things like that for new
Okay.
revenue.
So it was a fear factor, essentially. Okay, fine, thank you.
I just Googled it and it says it comes from California Proposition 4 in 1979. And it was approved by voters with the goal of keeping state and local government spending, including school spending, capped at 1978-79 levels, but adjusted for changes in population and inflation.
Okay, so it goes back that far.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we pass, so we're good.
Well under, well under.
Well under.
Anyone else? Director Eccles?
No, but I'm happy to make the motion if we're ready. Oh, actually, I see there's a public comment.
Okay, and my only comment would be, I was wondering, it'd be interesting to see if there's any public agencies that approach their Gann limit or go over it nowadays.
Oh my gosh.
But I'm sure we don't have that information, but it'd be interesting to see. Okay, so let's hear public comment. I can't see anyone on my screen with their hand up. Oh,
That's
pardon
me. That's me.
Kelly.
My hand's up.
Apologize. I see it.
All right. Yeah, when it comes to public agencies that are going over their Gann limit or whatever, the one version of the Gann limit is you have to go to the voters to get approval for bond measures. And so what some agencies are able to do, in particular, the California State Water Project, is they're able to build 20 or $40 billion projects, which are truly gigantic, that drain all the water from the Delta or whatever. They're able to bring those forward. And then our local water agencies and their board of directors, they don't worry about those at all. They just go along with them and approve them and agree to fund them from their, on behalf of their ratepayers or whatever, because their ratepayers will never pay $1 of that. What they do is they put that funds, all that money goes on to the property taxes. So people don't look at their property taxes. It's very well hidden. And then, we get giant capital projects. And the way they did this with the 1979 Gann limit was they passed this thing a year or two before 1979, so it avoids the Gann limit. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly.
I should have known, but we won't do that. Promise.
Not us. No.
If there are no further public comments, Director Eccles has made the motion to accept and pass this on or make it part of our budget package. Is there a second?
I second.
And we have a second by Director Wieskamp. Seeing no further discussion, looking around, then Shannon, could you help us with the vote?
Yes. Shannon Rice, recording secretary, taking roll call vote. Director Eccles,
Aye.
Director Wieskamp,
Aye.
and Chair and Director Waspy.
Aye.
Thank you.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much, Christina. And our next item is the September 30th, 2022 investment report and portfolio review.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Deborah Spalding, Assistant Finance Officer. And I believe I'm sharing my screen now. Are you guys seeing the presentation?
Yes.
All right. So as usual, this is a quarterly report we bring to you. This is the September 30th, 2022 report. And as usual, I'll do a brief overview, and then I'm going to turn it over to our folks from PFM who are here today, Allison County and Sarah Walsh. And they'll give you some more detail about the investments that are managed by PFM. All right, so this is a page, this is an excerpt from a page in your packet. It is page 17, attachment A of the investment report, and all the details about the district's investments. And so this is a snippet from the top, the liquidity portfolio. So these are the funds that are either already cash or readily convertible to cash. And just a couple things to point out here. One is that during Q3, we are drawing down on our cash. So we don't receive very much revenue in Q3, very little property taxes, a little bit of fees. And so you can look at the balance of the CAMP account, and you can see that that's really being drawn down quite a lot. And the same thing happens every year, and happened in the prior year as well. Moving down a little further on this page, looking at the short and mid-term security investments that are not readily convertible to cash. And a couple highlights in this section, which you'll hear more detail about, I'm sure, when PFM does their presentation. Number one, we decreased holdings in treasuries during this time period, and then increased exposure to CDs and corporate notes. And then lastly, towards the bottom of the page, we have all of our funds that are held in trust. The funds are held by another entity, and they're used only for very specific purposes, not for operating costs. And so first, looking at our pension trust funds, you'll see a decrease in our holdings in the pension trust. So we began to draw down on that trust for the first time this year. We withdrew $2 million as had been planned. This is the first of the draws that we'll be doing over the next several years, and we are reimbursing ourselves for our CalPERS unfunded actuarial liability costs. And then moving further down on the page, you'll see we are slowly spending down our Measure WW project funds. So we sold in February, we sold $60 million of bonds. The trustee is now holding those funds, and then as we do projects, we request reimbursement from the project funds to reimburse ourselves for those costs. And then lastly, the category at the bottom is our debt service funds. So we are collecting revenue through the property tax bills and holding that in these funds until the payments are due. And so you can see that the amount went down, and that's reflecting the payment of those debt service costs. And I'm going to turn it over to PFM now, and then after they do their presentation, we'll have a recommendation. I hope to bring this to the full board.
All right, thank you, Deb, and good afternoon, everybody. I'll go ahead and share my screen. As Deb mentioned, I'm joined today by my colleague, Sarah Walsh, and I will go ahead and start the presentation, and then Sarah will review the ESG section with you. Just one moment. Okay, can you all see my screen? Okay. Okay, great, thank you. Just to let you know, I cannot see anybody while I'm sharing my screen. So if you do have a question, please feel free just to shout it out. We are starting on page 18 of the agenda packet. And I'll go ahead and full screen. Okay, so as we do, I'll just start out with a brief market and interest rate update to provide some context for what happened in the portfolio during the quarter. And starting here with just some market themes during the quarter. It likely won't be a surprise to hear that the US economy continues to be characterized by inflation, and specifically persistent high inflation. Inflation has been elevated for some time now, and the latest consumer price index, or CPI, reading showed that prices increased by 7.7% over the past year as of October. This latest reading, while still very high and well above the Fed's 2% target of inflation, it has shown that inflation is starting to decrease after peaking at 9.1%, again, as measured by CPI in June. We have recently seen a slowdown in the housing market, and the slowdown has really been driven by high interest rates, as mortgage rates are near 7%, moved above 7% briefly. And so that has kind of really slowed down home buying and selling in the US, as it's made home affordability more challenging. The consumer, the you and me. Yes.
Pardon, you said we could shout out and ask you a question. So with that in mind, you were referring to the US economy and a deteriorating housing market. And as you explained, there's not as many starts and interest rates are going up. So I know we're very different here in the East Bay, but does that include housing? Because that's what 81% of our revenue comes from, or whatever the number was that we talked about in the last presentation. Are those, is that indicative of the entire nation, or how's the two-county Alameda and Contra Costa doing in relationship to other areas?
Yeah, I don't have specific information on the area, the local economy, or the local housing market. I would say it's probably in line with historical, typically in that area, housing is typically more expensive than the rest of the country. I do feel like it usually trends the same way. Again, with the high, everyone's experiencing the high mortgage rates. Home prices across the country have been elevated for quite some time. We did see prices, again, nationally, come down a little bit recently, again, to try to, people who are trying to sell have to kind of make up for those high mortgage rates. But home prices have not come down a lot. And again, I don't have the specifics on the local area, but I would imagine the trend is very similar. But likely, home prices remain much higher than the national average.
All right, thank you.
So the consumer, so again, that'd be you and me, continues to spend, and consumer spending remains a positive contributor to GDP. But with this sustained spending, we do see savings account balances have declined and credit card balances have increased. So it looks like people, for the most part, have spent the extra stimulus funds received as part of the various COVID relief packages, and are now starting to spend down those savings and use those credit cards as they continue to spend, and also to pay more for those items that they were previously buying, due to that high inflation, as that high inflation has really impacted, all aspects of the economy, things like food and shelter that everybody has to spend money on. We have seen the economic outlook continue to worsen over the past year, and the probability of a recession sometime over the next year continues to grow. This does, however, come with a labor market that is fairly strong. I say fairly because when we look at the headline numbers, the unemployment rate is below 4%, so very low unemployment rate. And we continue to see, several 100,000 new jobs added each month. However, we hear, again, as talked about earlier, certain companies laying people off, some laying fairly large numbers of people off. We've also seen the average hourly earnings dip slightly, as well as the labor force participation rate. So while the labor market has been pretty strong, and while those headline numbers still look good, we are seeing some weakness there. Likely a lot of that driven by that potential expectation for a recession, kind of companies preparing for that, whether it does happen or not. The Fed is with this backdrop, the Fed is actively working to lower inflation. And this means they are tightening monetary policy, making borrowing of money more expensive, which could potentially put economic growth in the U.S. at risk. That's one of the reasons you see this expectation or the probability of a recession increase. Much of that is due to the Fed's tightening of their monetary policy and the aggressive way they've been doing it. Early on, when the Fed first started raising interest rates earlier this year, there was talk of trying to achieve a soft landing. That's where, the Fed is able to lower inflation, slow growth, but without a recession. Really, no one's talking about a soft landing anymore. The Fed is just so focused on lowering inflation, really, despite what may happen to growth in the U.S. The Fed is primarily trying to achieve lower inflation by raising the Fed funds target rate. This is an overnight rate, but it impacts the level of short-term interest rates, of borrowing rates. The Fed funds rate, which was at 0% essentially to start the year, was 3.25% as of the report date, September 30th, and it's at 4% now. So after 6 rate hikes this year. Not only as the number of rate hikes, these 6 rate hikes in just 11 months has been very aggressive, but the level has been as well, meaning at the July, September, and November meetings, the Fed raised that rate by 0.75% at each meeting. Typically, historically, the Fed has raised that rate by 0.25%. So the Fed has made a number of rate hikes and pretty large rate hikes to aggressively try to tackle inflation. So far, we haven't seen, as I mentioned, a big change in inflation, but the Fed's actions have certainly resulted in high market volatility, both in the bond market where we invest the district funds and the stock market. In the bond markets, we have seen interest rates move significantly higher throughout 2022. They're currently at their highest levels in over 14 years. As we'll talk about further in the report, these high interest rates on the positive side has meant that new purchases being made for the district's portfolio are being done so at very attractive levels and will increase the portfolio's interest earnings moving forward. But on the downside, higher interest rates means lower prices on your existing holdings and lower market values, resulting in negative total returns. And again, we'll talk about that more in a couple pages. On the next page here, just looking at interest rates a little closer. So we show the US Treasury yield curve on the right-hand side, 3 months out to 30 years and at 3 points in time. So December 31st, you kind of start the year in that dotted line, and then June 30th in the light blue line, and September 30th in the dark blue line. So the light blue to the dark blue showing the change over the quarter. And you can see across that curve, interest rates are up quite a bit. And you can also see that interest rates moved up higher on the shorter end. If you look at that table, that last column, which shows the quarter over quarter change, you can see that very clearly there. That shorter end of the yield curve, kind of 2 years and under, is really impacted by Fed activity and expectations on that Fed funds target rate. And so that area of the yield curve has moved up quite sharply over the year and then definitely also over the quarter. On the longer end, which is more impacted by long-term growth expectations and long-term inflation expectations, while it has moved higher over the quarter, didn't as much as the shorter end. And so we did end the quarter with an inverted yield curve where those short-term rates are higher than those longer-term rates. Economists, anyone interested in the markets, really always pays attention to an inverted yield curve. Historically, that has preceded a recession. And so it is something that, of course, is concerning when you do have an inverted yield curve, concerning meaning we may see a slowdown over the next 12 or 18 months from the first time it inverted, which was actually back in June. So I mentioned the positive side of these higher yields is that purchases being made for the district are being made at these very attractive interest rates. New purchases have yields over 3%, some even over 4%. So that will be very good for interest earnings moving forward. The downside, we can kind of see on the next page. The next page here, we look at total returns of various indices. So this is not the district's portfolio yet, but we will get to that. But we're showing the total returns of 1 to 5 year indices of different sectors for the third quarter and then also year to date. And you can see here pretty sharply negative across all sectors. This is the third quarter of negative returns. So just looking at the chart on the left-hand side. So a negative return, you get a negative return when your unrealized market value losses are greater than your realized earnings. And so while interest earnings are increasing, for the district portfolio, for fixed income portfolios, for fixed income indices, really all portfolios managed according to California government code are seeing these negative returns because your realized earnings are less than your unrealized losses. The sharp increase in interest rates has just resulted in pretty large unrealized market value losses. As when rates move higher, prices move lower. And again, this was true for not only for the quarter, but year to date, as we'll see later on, also the past year and past 3 years, just because that increase in interest rates has been so significant. Lastly, in the market update page, kind of just looking ahead, we pulled here just some quotes from the Fed, the press conference following the Fed's September meeting. As I said before, the Fed is very focused on lowering inflation. They want to get inflation back down to 2%, kind of no matter what happens to the U.S. economy. As that last quote there says, no one knows whether this process will lead to a recession, but they just think price stability, that 2% inflation, is the most important thing for for the US economy and all of us living in this economy. And while the Fed is fairly transparent in their plans to a point, there is still a lot of uncertainty about what the Fed may continue to do over the next year as far as their target rate goes, and in turn, where interest rates are headed. And that's what the charts on the bottom there show. I'll just look at the one on the left-hand side, the 2-year Treasury yield. I'm showing that interest rate in that blue line since the start of 2021, has increased very sharply. And then the dotted line is kind of the forecast based on economist surveys, with the dotted portion being the median forecast, and then the shaded area being the range of forecasts. And so you can see, while the median forecast thinks interest rates will start to trend lower next year, that range of forecasts is really just all over the place because no one really knows what's going to happen. It's really going to depend on what happens with inflation. If the Fed rate hikes start to work and we continue to see inflation move lower, then next year the Fed will start to, slow down and then stop their rate hikes. On the other hand, if inflation does not move lower, those rate hikes will continue to happen, which will impact interest rates. So just really a lot of uncertainty as we kind of wait to see what happens with inflation. The Fed has stated that they likely will raise their rate again at their December meeting and into 2023, but gets pretty uncertain after that point, as again, we'll just have to wait and see what happens with inflation. So I'll move to the next section, which is the district's portfolio. So starting here on 25 of the agenda packet is a snapshot of some of the funds managed by PFM AM. This excludes your bond proceeds funds, and it excludes overnight accounts. So just those funds that are managed to a longer duration strategy in an effort to grow the value over time. The portfolio has a duration, which is very similar to average maturity of 2.33 years. You can see that this is quite a bit longer than the benchmark duration. So on this page, we are showing the benchmark is the 1 to 3 year US Treasury Index, which is the portfolio's benchmark. However, as you may recall, late last year, we decided, after discussions with staff and a presentation to the Finance Committee, to change that benchmark from the 1 to 3 year Treasury Index to the 1 to 5 year Treasury Index, so extending it out a bit longer. So over the course of the past 3 quarters, we have been gradually moving that duration longer. And that extension, or that transition, ended on September 30th, meaning the new benchmark, the 1 to 5 year, went into effect on October 1st. So your next report will show the 1 to 5 year index information. So that's why here you see the portfolio duration longer than the benchmark duration. And looking at that duration distribution in the bottom corner there, you can see the difference. Your portfolio holds a good amount of 3 to 5 year investments, while your old benchmark did not. The new benchmark will look more similar to the district's portfolio. The district's yield at cost of a 1.77%, essentially your earnings rate. We've seen this yield continue to move higher over the course of the year. Last quarter, that was a 1.30%, so a good increase over the last 3 months. The increase in yield has been achieved through active management, and in some cases, and partially due to the extended duration, buying those longer term securities. So selling shorter maturity, lower yielding securities, securities that were purchased a couple of years ago when rates were near zero, to buy investments at these new higher yields at their highest levels in about 15 years. I mentioned earlier, all purchases made this quarter had yields of 3%. Some over 4%. So that is slowly helping to increase the yield at cost, or the earnings rate on the portfolio. The portfolio is very high credit quality. You can see in the chart below there, the average rating is the AA category. And then looking at the sector allocation, it's also very well diversified by sector. About half the portfolio in US Treasuries, the safest and most liquid sector. It is a sector that we favored somewhat more than others over the past couple of years due to narrow yield spreads. That said, the other half of the portfolio is very well diversified. You can see it's very colorful. Also, as Deb mentioned, this most recent quarter, we did find some opportunities to further diversify the portfolio. She noted that a slight decrease in the treasury allocation in favor of some other sectors. And I'll just turn to the next slide here. So I know there's a lot on here, but what it's showing is a summary of the portfolio activity during the quarter. The chart on the left-hand side shows the various sectors, and then the sales and maturities, and then the purchases. And if you look at the table on the right, it's kind of sorted by net activity. So this was the quarter where we added some agency commercial mortgage-backed securities, corporate notes, negotiable CDs, municipal obligations, and then a slight increase in the asset-backed securities. Again, this helped to further diversify the portfolio. We used periods of volatility where we saw yield spreads widen out. So where the relative value between these different sectors and treasuries widened to take advantage and add those different sectors to the portfolio. Moving to the next page is the performance. So this will look very similar that 3 months and 1 year data to what we saw when we looked at the index returns. It's not great to look at, I'm going to admit that, but it is just a result of what's happening with interest rates right now. We saw it in the market, those index returns, and now we'll see it in the portfolio. So for the past quarter, you can see your interest earned is, of course, a positive number, around $500,000. And then your change in market value, which comprises mostly your unrealized gains or losses. And so this number is pretty negative, again, due to the rise in interest rates, pushing down the prices of the securities in your portfolio, resulting in a lower market value. And of course, those unrealized losses are only realized when you sell a security. So the portfolio would not realize all of these losses unless all those securities were sold. And again, while the interest continues to move higher, that change in market value has just been so large due to that sharp increase in interest rates for a total dollar return that is negative. And that translates to a portfolio, percentage return of minus 1.91% for the quarter. We do show here that the portfolio did underperform your benchmark. The benchmark returned minus 1.56%. That's because, again, your portfolio has that duration that's about 2.2 years, while the benchmarks is 1.7. The portfolio is so much longer because it has transitioned to a longer strategy. And this was a quarter where longer strategies underperformed shorter ones. For some comparison, the 1 to 5 year Treasury index returned about minus 3% for the quarter. So the portfolio did quite well relative to that new benchmark. And then the 1 year number also very negative due to what we saw earlier, just that sharp increase in interest rates, which has pulled down the 3 year number. But if we look out longer, this is a long-term portfolio. We can see the past 10 years, the portfolio, does contribute positive return of 0.82%, outperforming the benchmark by a good amount there, about 22 basis points. That's each year on average. So it's an annualized return. So for the past 10 years, each year on average, the portfolio has returned a positive 0.82%. And then finally, on the last page here, before I turn it over to Sarah, just the earnings when you take away those unrealized gains or losses. Again, your interest earned, this is an increase over last quarter's interest earnings as we've added those higher yielding securities to the portfolio. You do see here though, you did have net realized losses in the portfolio. So this is when we sell a security, you do in this current rate environment, you do realize a loss. And so it does reduce your earnings in the current period, in this current, prior quarter period, because we sold securities at losses, you did lower your earnings for that current period. However, because we are reinvesting those sold securities in securities that have much higher yields than where we were selling. Everything we're selling has a yield of less than 1%, to buy securities yielding 3 or 4.5%. So while you do take a loss to current period earnings, you will increase your earnings going forward or over the long term than if you had held on to those very low yielding securities. So that's something we'll continue to see, that interest earned number continuing to move higher as we have these higher yielding securities. We will see these realized losses also start to move lower as we expect interest rates, while to move higher, likely not at the same pace. Additionally, there was some increased activity because we were transitioning benchmarks. So that contributed to some of the additional trade activity in the portfolio. But all in all, while these high interest rates, do negatively impact your total return, do cause those unrealized market value losses, over the long term, it's really great for the portfolio to be able to buy securities at these higher interest rates to increase your realized earnings moving forward. The next section is the ESG pages. So I will turn it over to Sarah to cover this. And then again, feel free to jump in with questions, or we can address any additional questions once Sarah has finished this section. Hey, Sarah, are you there? I do see that she is on, but I can go ahead and start this. So the first page here that we show you is, just show which section of the portfolio we are talking about when we are looking at the ESG score. So the environmental, social, and governance score that we're looking at. If you look at the pie chart, the securities that are shaded green have ESG scores. U.S. Treasuries and municipal obligations do not have ESG scores, so they're excluded from the analysis. And so that represents, as we saw earlier, a little over half of the portfolio in those sectors. So about 46% or $64 million of the portfolio is what we're looking at when we look at the ESG score of the portfolio. And then the next page here, providing really a one-page summary of the portfolio. What we show here in the various charts on the top here is the overall ESG risk rating of the portfolio.
Allison.
Yeah, hey Sarah.
Hi, sorry, I just got booted out of the meeting for a second. So I can pick up from here if you'd like.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I just went to this page, so you can start from the top here on this
Okay,
page.
I think I was only out for about 30 seconds, which was just absolutely terrible timing. But yeah, with that, I'll pick things up from here. So I'll go over the ESG analysis of the district's the main portfolio. So this page here is the high level ESG summary for your portfolio, and the overall risk rating, looking at the top right graph here, was unchanged quarter over quarter at 21.5. And the individual company ratings did change throughout the quarter, as well as the market value allocations to those holdings. But almost kind of coincidentally here, this resulted in no quarter over quarter change in the portfolio's weighted average ESG risk rating score. And looking at the green and orange chart here, we can see the allocations to each rating category were also relatively consistent from June 30th to September 30th. And the changes were so insignificant, in fact, that the rounding of the numbers make it look like there's no change occurring at all, but there were in each rating category during the quarter, but of course, none of those were too significant. All in all, the portfolio continues to rate very well from an ESG perspective. At 21.5, the portfolio lands in the lower end of the medium risk category. Only 2 issuers held rate within the high risk category as of September 30th, making up about 1% of the portfolio. And those 2 issuers were Ford and Lockheed Martin, which both moved ever so slightly into the high risk category during the quarter. And now both issuers were in compliance at the time of the investment, though. So they were purchased when they were in the medium risk category. And fitting into our theme here, kind of the changes in risk ratings for those 2 issuers specifically, they just barely fell out of the medium risk category with ratings of 30.2 and 30.3, and the cutoff there is 30. So Lockheed Martin's score increased as a result of some small controversies related to product safety, and Ford experienced an increase because of safety concerns as well with regard to their electric cars. So, however, just to note, Ford has made significant efforts since quarter end, since September 30th, and their score now falls back within the medium risk category. So that's good news. And just a bit more on that, in case you were curious, Ford's electrification plan, Ford Plus as it's been called, entails a massive investment of over $150 billion. And they're really dedicating like a huge chunk of funds to that effort. And recently Ford also announced the split of its auto segment into 2 separate divisions, the Ford Model E, dedicated to electric vehicles, and Ford Blue, which is their dedicated to their gas-powered vehicles, to help scale up the development of their electric vehicles. So those efforts helped to increase their management score and decrease their overall risk rating. So now they're back within the medium risk category. And just looking back at the overall portfolio as a whole now, continuing down the page here, the management score and exposure score also remained the same during the quarter. The portfolio's exposure falls within the medium range. Companies held within the portfolio also show strong management, which just kind of reiterates the fact that the securities held are, high quality investments in well-researched companies. And the next few pages just provide some additional information on the ESG metrics of your portfolio, which I don't believe we plan to walk through with you all today. But if you have any questions in your review, just now's the time to ask, or you can follow up with me separately as well if nothing comes to mind right now. So yeah, at this point, I'll just open it up to questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any questions or comments on either presentation?
It's a little depressing, don't you think? But you're you're making an honest approach, so we know where we are. You can't argue with that.
Well, I know none of you have a crystal ball, but it's interesting in terms of the the goal of getting inflation down below 2%, and I'm just wondering, like, historically, how often, also first of all, looking backwards, how often have we had inflation below 2%?
It's been quite some time since we've been dealing. I mean, I think going back to the 70s or maybe the 80s, before we had inflation this high. Just looking back at my career with PFM, which is getting closer to 20 years and 15 years, we've been running below or at that 2% target that entire time. It was more like, is there ever going to be inflation, let alone, at 9%, 7%. So it has been quite some time since we've dealt with high inflation. And it's also been quite some time since we've seen the Fed act so aggressively to try to deal with the inflation. The last time they did that was again back in the the 70s or 80s when inflation was so high. So yes, it's been quite some time since inflation's been over 2%. It picked up in April of last year and then just steadily moved higher. I think with the last 2 months showing inflation moving lower, it's been a great sign. But again, still a long way to go. Most economists' projections right now and the Fed's projections, which again, they're usually a little more optimistic than we've seen here recently in terms of controlling inflation, but expectations are for inflation to move lower over the next, continue to move lower, getting back to that 2% target in about by about 2024. So we do expect, or the markets expect, the Fed expects inflation to continue to slowly move lower over the next couple of years.
So I guess now this is my crystal ball question, because I noticed how strongly the market reacted when they saw the inflation drop from 9.1% to 7.7%. So, but then, the Fed came out with some pretty hawkish comments. And so what do you think the Fed will move? Like, how slowly will the Fed start to move if inflation continues to drop? But obviously we're going to be a long ways from the 2% goal.
Yeah, so right now, the market expectation, kind of, which is based on the Fed funds futures security. It's a security that can be bought and sold in the market. That's based on that Fed's funds rate that the Fed is setting. So based on those expectations, is that the Fed, will raise rates in November, but likely not 75 basis points that we saw, possibly 25 basis points. The market does think the Fed will raise rates again in 2023, maybe a couple times. Initially the market thought the Fed, the terminal rate as high as they would get would be around 4.25%. At this point, that's only one more rate hike, but the market hasn't changed that because, as you know, some of what we heard from the Fed after their last meeting, the market now thinks that rate could get up to around 5%. So that would imply, a few more rate hikes moving here into 2023, possibly 25 or 50 basis point hikes at a time. So staying at that 5% level throughout the year before starting to move lower. But again, as you kind of implied in your question, that really only is if inflation starts to move lower. If inflation doesn't continue to move lower, the Fed rate hikes, won't stop. I do think some would like to see the Fed slow down to kind of give the market time to react to the higher interest rates. Maybe inflation won't fall immediately. But again, hopefully these last 2 months have been a good sign, and that the next few rate hikes will be at a smaller pace, and we'll continue to see inflation move lower. But yeah, right now the market expects kind of the Fed to pause middle of next year.
Thank you.
All right, I guess my only comment would be, I guess it was very good timing, you guys, on not including the investment report on the budget. But anyway, thank you, Allison and Sarah. Are there any, Kelly, public comments, what's up?
Okay, thank you. Wall Street Journal this morning had a great article about this kind of stuff, and they said there have been 9 cycles of rate hikes since 1976, and only 2 of them led to a soft landing that's defined as not having a recession at the end of it. So we're now in another cycle of rate hikes, and your odds of hitting a recession are what, 7 out of 9. And then when you look at this portfolio, and you talk about how your portfolio composition is out of congruence or is dissimilar to your benchmark, I would ask, why aren't you, and you're deliberately moving from one benchmark to the next, so why aren't you producing a blended benchmark? Blend those 2 benchmarks and come up with a benchmark that represents your current portfolio, and then have a blended benchmark to use. for this current portfolio, which is a hybrid bastard beast. And then finally, if we were to take, we're very much avoiding this, I know, because that's what government agencies do, and most human beings actually on this planet. But if we take a cold, hard look in the rear view mirror and have 20/20 hindsight, and you had no restrictions about how the government telling you that you had to buy bonds, everyone would I think have to agree that the right strategy a year or two ago was not to buy any of these bonds, which have declined in value, and to go 100% into short-term, securities of money market funds or something, and not take any, and not have any duration, and then that would have done a lot better. And then when you get tired of that, eventually, when you find the peak in the interest rate cycle, which is again you'd have requires a fortune teller, then you would buy in and go long on your bonds. Thanks.
Hindsight is 20/20, isn't it? Anyway, we have the opportunity to recommend to the full board this investment report. Would someone like to make that motion?
So move.
Thank you, Ann.
Second.
And a second by Director Eccles. We have a motion, a second. Seeing no further discussion, let's vote. Shannon, are you still with
Shannon
us?
Rice, recording secretary, taking roll call votes. Director Eccles,
Aye.
Director Wieskamp,
Aye.
and Director Wasby.
Aye.
Thank you.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. And thank you for those reports. Our next item is the third quarter 2022 general fund and other governmental funds financial reports. Deborah.
Director Wasby, I just wanted to introduce Anna Huang. She's been our acting assistant finance officer for, I don't know, almost 6 months now, and she's doing a great job. So you've met her before at a finance committee meeting, but she's going to present the third quarter results for you today. Thank you, Anna.
Good afternoon, I'm Anna Huang, Acting Assistant Finance Officer. Today, I'm presenting the quarter 3 2022 general funds and other governmental funds financial reports. I'm going to share a screen with you all. Okay. So here you see that on the screen is a summary general funds revenue and expenditures through September 30th, 2022. The revenue for the period through September 30th is $98 million, which is 51% of budget, and $6 million increase compared to the prior years, the same periods, primarily due to increase of property revenues and charge for services. Expenditures is $132 million, 68% of budget, and is $4 million higher compared to last year, primarily due to increase of salary expenses and interfund charges. Here on the screen, you see that the detailed general funds revenue and expenditures by category and also by divisions. The detail can be found in the report attachment A of your packet, which is page 95. Okay. And in here, you can see that the variance over and under 10% is reviewed and notated at the bottom of the page. The most significant variance is the services, expenditure, capital outlay, and supplies. They were low, however, they are on track when encumbrances are included in the reports. Attachment B of the report, you will see that it's a summary of other governmental funds quarterly reports, which includes special revenue funds, includes Measure FF, Lighting and Landscape Assessment District Funds, Zones of Benefits and Measure WW, Project Funds, Debt Services Funds, and Internal Service Funds, which allocates the cost of workers' compensations, general liabilities, employee benefits, major infrastructure, and major equipment expenditures. That conclude of my brief summary of the general fund revenue and expenditures and other governmental funds. Does anybody have any questions?
Questions, comments? I see none, and it looks pretty much like it has looked in the past, and we look like we're in pretty good shape. Anna, thank you very much for your presentation. Anna, if you could reduce that screen. Whoa, and do we have any questions from the public, comments from the public? Hearing none, we once again have the opportunity to forward this to the full board.
I'll move.
Second.
We have a motion by Director Wieskamp and a second by Director Eccles. Any further comment? Hearing none. Shannon, would you take the roll, please?
Shannon Rice, Recording Secretary, taking roll call vote. Director Eccles,
Aye.
Director Wieskamp,
Aye.
and Director Waspy.
Aye.
Thank you.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much, Anna. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Our next item is public comments. Hearing no public comments, do we have any committee member comments?
I'll say thanks for the efforts. It's taken a monumental amount of, I've got to say it because there are not many men among you, woman power in the finance department, plus some male support to get it done. But I'm so impressed when you get through it all. It may not be as much positive as we'd like, but it's an honest assessment, and that's what we really need to hear. So does the public. So thank you very much for all that.
Elizabeth.
Yeah, hi. I'd like to add my thanks and appreciation for all of the reports. This is certainly a heavy lift. As Deborah said earlier, November is that time of year. So appreciate it. And I also want to extend my appreciation again for the budget, which really reflects so many of the board's goals and the Park District's goals in general around equity, both in the workforce and also equitable access to parks, of course, land conservation, and combating the increasing impacts of climate change in terms of wildfire mitigation and prevention, and also the climate smart stewardship. And so all of that, really just pleased to see that well reflected in the budgeting.
Great, and I would, oh, pardon me, Deborah, go ahead.
I was just going to jump in there and say this is the last Finance Committee meeting of the year, and we so appreciate this committee. It is a lot of work for us and for you to go through and review all this information, and we really appreciate your comments. And Director Wieskamp, I've had you on the Finance Committee for so many years, and I've appreciated you the whole time, so you will be missed by all of us in the finance team.
You have a great team. And I'm always impressed with how well you work together. And as today, somebody else can step in for somebody else if there's a reason, which means you're well connected. And I think that's really important because it's not the best times financially right now in this nation. So let's hope you're going to hear better things the next one that comes along.
Yeah.
But thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I too would like to echo everyone's sentiments. It was a great job by the staff. You guys work like crazy to get this thing done, and it's always seems to be a wonderful presentation and a wonderful budget. And also, we'll mention this probably 3 or 4 more times, but congratulations once again on the Government Finance Officers Association Distinguished Budget Presentation Award. I think you've won this for the 110th time, if I'm not mistaken. So, gosh, so now we expect it. Good Lord, what would happen? Nothing will ever happen to break that record. But thank you very much, and Anne, we definitely will miss you.
It's very kind. You will continue and do well. I have utmost confidence.
Well, thank you. So if there's nothing further from staff or anyone for the good of the order, have a wonderful Thanksgiving, everybody, and we'll see you on the 6th and the 20th and talk about this again. We are adjourned. Take care.
I think they're going to go next to another committee, right?
Thank you.